Grapplearts Radio.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grapplearts Radio podcast. Now, normally in this podcast, we stick to the interview format. In the past, I've interviewed John Chamber, David Meyer, Eric Paulson, Marcus Suarez, Emily Kwok, Daniel McCormick, Sarah Kaufman, Tony Blauer, Ryan Hall, about a ton of issues ranging from MMA competition to strength and conditioning to sports psychology to the role of women in mixed martial arts and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and a ton of other good stuff. And I'm going to keep on doing those interviews. But today, I'm going to do something slightly different. We're going to do a Q&A. And I got these questions from sending out an email to my newsletter list, the Grappling Tips newsletter list, which you can sign up for, by the way, for free at grapplearts.com. And actually, I think you should sign up for at least two reasons. The first being that if I ever have another Q&A podcast like this, I'll send you an email, I'll say, what are your questions? I'll collect them all, and then I'll also let you know when the podcast is done and when I put it out. And the second reason is I just put out so much good information, grappling tips, techniques, articles, interviews, all kinds of good stuff. And like I said, it's free and you can unsubscribe at any point. So really, what have you got to lose? So now, without any further ado, let's get on to the questions.
Hi, Stephan. This is Jeff from North Carolina in the United States. I'm a big fan. I have all your iPad apps, and I enjoy your newsletter. I have a question about tapering off training approaching a competition. I'm right about on weight, and I have a very important competition coming up in a few weeks. And I'm just curious about how you wind down while making sure that you're in peak condition for the tournament. I've been training really hard, but obviously to prevent injury, as well as to make sure that I'm just not as beat up for the tournament. I'm wondering whether you put in cross-training in replace of regular BJJ training workouts, or do you just taper off and do drilling? So your thoughts would be most appreciated. Thank you so much.
Hey, Jeff. Usually when people are getting ready for competition, they're balancing a couple of different things. The first is cutting weight, and it sounds like you're kind of on track there, so I'm not going to concentrate on the weight cutting aspect, whether you're doing that through diet or exercise or dehydration. The second is tapering their training, which I think is what you're asking about. Now, of course, you have to cut back on your training. In fact, the harder you've been training, it's likely that you're somewhat overtrained, right? You're going to be training, and training in itself doesn't build you up. It breaks you down. It's in the rest and the recovery that you get better. The actual act of training breaks your muscles down, makes you feel tired, makes you slow, gets you beat up, bruised. But then when you take a break from training, your body compensates and you come up either to the level that you were before, which is called compensation, or you come up to a level higher than where you were, which is called supercompensation. If you want, you can go read an article that I have on my website about overtraining. It's one of the first ones I wrote way back in the day. So there is your goal. You want to supercompensate. You want to be at a higher level than where you were. Now, most people taper for their competition in several stages. First, they're just going to cut back on the intensity and the volume of their overall training, and then usually they go to a phase 2, which is doing nothing at all for a few days. The first phase, cutting back on the intensity, dialing down on the length and the hours of which you're training, that usually happens at 6 to 7 days out for most people. Now, it's all a question of personal experimentation. And if you do more than one competition, if this isn't your first competition, then you might already have a sense of how long it takes your body to begin to recover and begin to supercompensate, which is what we talked about in the first place. And so about 5 to 7 days out, you're going to really ramp down in your training. You might still do a little bit of drilling. You might still do a bit of light rolling with someone you trust. And some people I know even like to do a few intense, short bursts of anaerobic type cardio. They might do a few treadmill sprints. They're not going anywhere towards exhaustion because they're not wanting to break themselves down. They just want to teach their body how to breathe hard and their heart how to beat fast and to get that fast twitch muscle thing happening. So I wouldn't in general recommend cross training as much as highly specific sports training, such as drilling, such as light rolling, with someone you trust. I think that's the key thing. This is not the time to get cranked by that big monkey who wants to get a tap at all costs and is willing to, neck crank you or put on some really vicious choke. just to prove a point so close to the day, because as you point out, you just don't have the time to recover from something like that. Another common mistake people make is continuing to weight train too close to the day. Now, if I go out and I do a heavy set of squats, it's going to take me at least a week, maybe a little bit more, to actually become stronger. So if you're doing any weight training in that last week before your competition, all you're doing is breaking yourself down. Now, some people really like to do it for psychological reasons. It just makes them feel good. It makes their body feel strong. And I guess if you've done a lot of competition and you know that you like doing this and it really makes you feel psychologically ready, then who am I to say no? In terms of the timing of all of this, like I said, most people go to a reduced training schedule about a week out. They might do 3-4 days of light training and then 3-4 days of no training at all. And that can be hard for some people, especially if it's an important competition and especially if you've been training so hard for this. One thing I always like to think about is Roger Bannister, the first man to break the 4-minute mile, which was considered to be an unbreakable barrier. Danny Nasanto talks about his gym teacher telling him that it was scientifically proven that if a man ran a 4-minute mile, that his lungs would collapse and his heart would stop. Well, Roger Bannister did it. He did it on a remarkably low training mileage by today's standards. And it's important to note that he didn't run at all for 5 days before he actually broke the 4-minute mile. He wasn't going to forget how to run in those 5 days. He wasn't going to become less fit in those 5 days. He was just going to recover, rest up, and then be hungry to run. And hopefully that's what you're going to achieve with your taper before your competition. Good luck with that, and let us know how it goes.
Hi, Stephan. This is Ian from Michigan here in the United States. First off, I've always loved all the DVDs you put out in your newsletters, from everything with Grapplearts and beginning BJJ have just been really helpful. I was calling to see what your thoughts were on changing schools. The first school I started out at, the coach, or rather the instructor, didn't really put an emphasis on pinning and crushing and smashing the way the school I'm at now currently does. Before, it was more about flowing from move to move to move. And I'd become so accustomed and inundated to that style. Now I'm at a school where everybody is always trying to smash you and crush you and make you as uncomfortable as possible. And though, we always have technique to be strength and size, however, in this situation, a lot of my techniques are null and void because of the crushing and the smashing. And I am able to work my escapes. However, it's such a draining process because these guys spend so much time on the crush and the smash. Just wondering if you have any thoughts or insight or way around that. Thanks again. Love all the material you put out.
Hi, Ian. It sounds like one school really emphasized flow and movement and a small person's jiu-jitsu game, and the other school emphasized pinning and smashing and more or less a big person's jiu-jitsu game. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You've got to experience both ends of the spectrum. And I don't know if you're big or small, but if you are small, then that movement will come in extremely handy. You're just going to have to learn how to calibrate it to use it against bigger people. And if you're bigger, then if you can learn the smashing game and maintain the small person's game, that's a really good combination for someone who's bigger. Because you're always going to run into somebody who's bigger and stronger than you. And it's weird when you run into somebody who's big who moves like a small person. It's a very, very effective strategy. So hopefully you can take the approaches and strategies from both schools, put them together, and come up with something that really works for you. Now, with regards to some techniques of escaping the pins of somebody who's bigger and stronger than you, this is something that Emily Kwok and I spent a lot of time on when we were filming the How to Defeat the Bigger, Stronger Opponent DVDs. And you might really want to listen to Emily on this because she's 140 pounds, and basically every time she steps on the mat, someone's trying to pin her and smash her, just like is happening to you at your new school. But some of the take-home messages that Emily had was, first of all, staying mobile. Finding ways to not let the opponent control your hips, pin you down, and consolidate his strength and weight on top of you. So if you stay mobile, using an open guard or a butterfly guard and moving fast, it's a lot harder for them to zero in. It's a little bit like this elephant chasing this little mouse around. Another important thing is denying the grips. Usually in order to pass your guard and smash you and pin you down, they need to grab in certain places. If you're fighting with a gi, they need to grab your lapel, your pant leg, your sleeve. Don't give them those grips. If you're fighting no gi, they're trying to grab behind your neck. They're trying to grab your wrist. They're trying to get the overhook. They're trying to get the underhook. Don't give them these grips. And finally, with regards specifically to escaping the pins, you've got to learn to start escaping before the pin happens, escaping as it's coming on. A lot of people have got this bad habit of they'll defend the guard. You know, I've got you in my guard and you're trying to pass my guard and I'll defend. And then finally, as you're coming around, there's a certain point where I see that it's not going to work anymore. And I kind of relax and I let you get the side mount. And then I start working on getting out of side mount. And that's completely the wrong approach. What's much better is to start your escape before the pin is completely solidified. Don't relax. Don't relax into that pin and just go, oh, all right, here it is. No, deny them that and just keep on moving and use whatever escape techniques you have before that pin gets consolidated. It's so much easier to get out early. It's so much harder to get out later. Now, if you want to see some examples of this, go to YouTube, Transitional Escapes to Get Out of Pins on the Ground. That's a little YouTube video that Emily and I released that kind of deals with this topic of not letting yourself get pinned and not letting yourself get smashed. And I hope this helps. Good luck with it.
Hi, Stephan. This is Jordan. My main problem is I train in jiu-jitsu, and every time I achieve the mount position in a grab, I always feel the only submission I have is Kimura, and I really lose focus once I get into the mount. I do that as well, so I just think about grabbing down, and I never really pull off arm bars. So I was wondering if you had any good submissions from mount, because that seems like most of my moves are off of my back. I'm really good at fighting off of my back. And also I have a weak left arm, and a lot of people in my gym have realized it, so every time I'm in guard or half guard, they always seem to attack my left arm. Yeah, that's the only question I have. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Okay, so first of all, I think we've got to sort out something. And that's when you say the word Kimura for mount, we might be talking about different things. Either we're talking about the mount position where I'm sitting across someone's chest with my knees in their ribs and my feet near their hips. And in that case, applying the Kimura is possible, but it's kind of tricky. I'm wondering if you might be talking about the so-called Americana or the V-arm lock, where you basically push his hand down beside his ear, figure four your arms, and then apply it by lifting his elbow and moving his fist down. That would be the Americana or the V-arm lock, and that's a totally valid attack from mount. If you're talking about the Kimura, it would more typically be applied from side mount, not from full mount. I'm going to go with the possibility that you've misquoted yourself, and that you're actually talking about the Americana from mount. Now that's a totally valid attack. There are lots of other high percentage attacks from mount, and lots of low percentage attacks from mount as well. I'd say the highest percentage ones would include the V-arm lock that you were talking about, the arm bar, and once the person's all balled up and really got their elbows down, most often you either have to set up the arm bar either by going for the neck, that would be Hodge or Gracie going for the collar choke, and then the person may react and give you their arms, in which case you can go for the arm bar, or by going to something like S-mount, which puts a tremendous amount of pressure on your opponent's diaphragm and makes it hard to breathe, and then he gives you the arms. Other common submissions include the head and arm triangle, the triangle choke, if your legs are built that way, if you're flexible enough and have legs long enough to maneuver into position. A little bit more advanced, the reverse arm bar, but I've been having some really good luck with that recently. Of course, with the gi, there's a ton of lapel chokes, and when you take a look at how many matches Hodge or Gracie has finished with the so-called basic lapel choke from mount, it's amazing. So that technique can work at the lowest levels, and it can work at the highest levels. You can also use your own gi, the so-called Ezekiel choke, where you put one arm around his head, put your fingers inside your own sleeve, and then put your fist in the guy's throat. Now, there's lots and lots of other fancier or slightly less common, maybe a bit lower percentage, but surprising submissions that you can do. For example, when I'm fighting somebody I just can't attack their upper body, I often let them escape from mount into half guard. From being mounted, I let them get one of my legs between their legs. Now they think they've got me in half guard, and they do, but then I immediately spin for a knee bar. Now that's a bit risky. I would only do that if I felt comfortable enough that I could get back to a good position if I totally blew the knee bar. Or if time is running out and I've got to do something in the next 10 seconds or I'm going to lose. Also, in your call, you mentioned ground and pound. And ground and pound is a totally valid option if you're training more of a mixed martial arts type of training. When you take a look at the UFC, take a look at how many top-level fighters who know better than to turn their back have turned their back once they started getting punched in the face. So there, they started in mount, they got hit in the face, they panicked, they turned their back, and they got choked out. So the ground and pound from the mount does set up a lot of submission. It gets the guy to push you away with his arms, and voila, the arm bar. It gets the guy to turn, and you can take his back. It gets the guy to not pay attention to how his arms are positioned. You can get the head and arm triangle. And I guess finally I should mention that if you're really having difficulty submitting the guy from mount, there's no rule that says that you have to stay in mount. If you can't submit him from mount, then switch off. Go to side mount, dismount. Go to knee mount. That puts a ton of pressure on him and again, gets him to do silly things. So I hope that's a quick tour of some of the highest percentage options that you have, and also some alternate strategies. Don't stay in mount if you just can't submit somebody from there. Work on your submissions from there in the long term, but in the short term, you might choose to abandon the mount once in a while, and that's okay too.
Hey, how you doing, Stephan? It's Stephan Kesting. Nice to talk to you. My name is Joe Campbell. Once again, thank you for sending me free submissions defense DVD to me. I do appreciate that. And thanks for responding in person. That was cool. My question is this. I have your half guard DVD, the leg lock package, the knee bars, the one with the toe hold type percentage one, the yoga DVD. I have the defense DVD, and I have the X guard and whatnot. And my question is this. With so much information out there, there's all the DVDs I have, and there's also YouTube, emails, and things like that. I kind of think there's information overload, and my biggest problem is not remembering the moves. I think sometimes I forget the moves after class as soon as I hit the parking lot. And what's a good way to remember my moves? I'm getting taught in class, and if they teach us half guard, I'll kind of look at the half guard DVD. That's my question, is how do I memorize the moves? What's the best way to do this? I think I have a lot of tools. I have a school I go to. I also have a submission, like a grappling dummy too. How much time do you think I should dedicate to after class? I'm starting to take notes. After class I take notes. And just want to know, how do I retain the information? That's my biggest problem, is memory retention. Once again, thank you. And I probably want to buy your flagship product. It's reasonably priced to me. But when I get that again will be too much information. So how much time should I dedicate to watching DVDs, working with the dummy, and whatnot? Thank you very much. You've been really helpful. Bye.
You didn't say how long you'd been training, and I wish you had, because this really, I think, is an issue that's different for you when you're relatively new to the sport and when you've been in the sport for a while. The longer you've been in the sport, a couple of things happen. Your capacity for memorizing techniques goes up, and that's just practice. It's like the more languages you learn, the easier it is to learn a new language. I think I heard someone say that after you've learned 4 or 5 languages, you only have to spend half the time to pick up your 6th, 7th, 8th language. I only speak 4 or 5, so I don't know if that's true from personal experience, but I think something very similar happens on the mat. Once you have a certain amount of knowledge, it's just easier to absorb more of that kind of knowledge. Another thing that happens is your ability to chunk incoming knowledge into similar groups increases. And by that I mean, instead of having 20 different chokes that involve having, let's for the sake of argument say you're going with a gi, one hand deep in the lapel, you really got one kind of choke with the hand deep in the lapel, and then 20 different ways of applying pressure on the other side of the neck. your other hand with your palm down, your other hand with your palm up, your other hand with your elbow, you're using your knee, using your other knee, using your leg. So you're not really learning new techniques. You're learning how to use a concept, which is squeeze on both sides of the neck, and then apply it across a wide range of circumstances. Now, I've got some other rambling thoughts on the topic. It's a common problem. A lot of people run into this, myself included, really. So the first thing that comes to mind is that there's really two reasons to learn a new technique or to be training a brand new technique. The first is maybe you can add it to your game. Maybe it'll be one of those rare techniques that perfectly fits your game and perfectly fits where you want to go. Now, this is more the case as you become more advanced and not when you're a beginner. When you're a beginner, you don't really know what you need. Your game isn't that well defined. By the time you've been training for 3, 4, 5 years, you will start having a more defined game. And if I show you a technique, I show you a wrist lock from side mount, say, you'll know pretty quickly whether or not that technique fits into your game. So that's the first reason. Maybe it'll be one of those rare techniques that you add to your game. And keep in mind that most high-level practitioners do not have complex games. They don't have a million techniques. They don't have a million attacks. What they do have is an uncanny ability to steer the match into a situation where they can then apply the 3 or 4 or 5 things that they're best at doing. I think this is most clear in judo. Take a look at high-level judo. High-level judoka have got 2, 3, maybe 4 throws. They're not out there learning a million new throws all the time. They're learning ways to steer the match, get the grips, get the timing right, so that they can use their favorite throws. It's very similar. If you watch Marcelo Garcia on the ground, he's doing the same things over and over against all kinds of different people. Somehow he manages to impose his own game on the match. Now, I said there were 2 reasons to learn new techniques. The first was to maybe add another technique to your arsenal. And the second is to become familiar with the different kinds of things that you might run into out there. Doesn't mean you have to master it. Doesn't even really mean that you need to memorize it. It just helps when, say, you're turtled and somebody's wrapping their legs around your neck, that you're going, oh yeah, I kind of remember this. They're going to try and cross their ankles and choke me like this. So it's not so that you can become an expert at the technique. It's so that you can become more familiar with it and that it won't take you by surprise and you can learn to preempt it when somebody tries to do it to you earlier. Now, about the note-taking, I think note-taking works really well for certain kinds of practitioners. I did it myself a ton, especially when I was starting out. Whether it'll work for you, only time will tell. I think you should try it. There's at least a chance that it'll help you memorize these techniques more effectively. For some people, it's not the act of seeing the technique in class. It's the act of taking the pen and trying to figure out how to describe it in writing and putting it down on paper that works. It's kind of a learning method. There's teaching styles and learning styles. Well, for some people, that learning style works really well, and it might work really well for you too. And here's something I've been thinking about a little bit recently, and I don't know how well it's going to come out. Have you heard of the 70-20-10 rule that's used by Google, and Google being the multi-gazillion-dollar company that we all love and adore? Now, apparently they break up their business into percentages. 70% of their business is concentrating on their core products. In that case, that would be search and advertising. That's what 70% of their employees do, or their employees spend 70% of their time doing. 20% of their time is spent being creative, looking at other projects, trying to think of the next killer app or the next killer interface that users might use. And 10%, the remaining 10%, is just on wacky, outlandish projects that are so far out that you would normally write them off. But who knows? There's an outside chance that it could be the next home run, or that could stimulate an interesting conversation. And in some ways, I think training should be like that as well. If you're getting to be fairly advanced, then about 70% of your time, you should be working on your main game. The main sequences, the main attacks, the main escapes that you use all the time, that you know work for you and your style of playing and your body type and all that. 20% of your time, you can spend being creative, trying, seeing if that wrist lock from side mount does work for you, seeing if this cool escape that you saw on YouTube might work, seeing if this thing that Kesting told you about actually has any chance of fitting in with the rest of your game. And then 10% of the time you just spend doing crazy things, doing all the wrong things. This includes experimenting with stuff that might piss your instructor off, might not be normal Brazilian jiu-jitsu tactics, or might not be normal tactics at your gym, and just playing and having fun. Maybe it'll work. It's unlikely it'll work. Who knows? Maybe it'll work, and at least it'll expand your knowledge of the game, and then you can look back someday and say, yeah, I remember when I tried to do this. It was crazy. It didn't work. So that's the 70-20-10 rule coming from Google, and I think it might have some utility for our training as well. And then finally, one thing I talked about earlier, the use of concepts. I think that really helps break down a game into larger chunks. So you're not trying to remember 35 ways to pass the guard. You're just trying to remember a couple of core concepts. And then everything else is just details in how to put those concepts into action. Now that's a pretty big topic, and I'll save that for another day. But that's often a very useful way to take a huge amount of information. And you are getting a huge amount of information, especially if you train with the gi, because then you've got all those weird grips and all those funky positions that just aren't possible without the gi. To take all those huge number of variations and to condense it down into a much smaller number of things to remember. So I hope that somewhere in that rant, I've given you a couple of ideas on how to take that information and to make it more manageable, and how to know what to focus on in your training. Good luck with it.
Hey, Stephen, how you doing? Just had a question. I'm a blue belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and it's really frustrating for me because, I keep getting tapped out by white belts or white blue belts, which are the same weight as me, but they're just stronger than me, and something about it, I don't know if I'm weak or something, but I get thrown around really easy, and it's something about, other guys overpower me. Is there something I could do to overpower them, I guess? Because my techniques are okay. It's just that I can't seem to overpower them, They just manhandle me sometimes, What am I doing wrong? What can I do? What should I train? Should I do more weightlifting? I just can't add it up, Maybe my bones are too weak or brittle, or I'm just a weak person in general. I would love for you to help me out with that one because it's very frustrating. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so you're getting overpowered all the time. And one of the things you asked is, should you lift weights to get stronger? Now, I'm going to give you a tentative yes on that, but maybe not for the reason that you think. Obviously, if you do weightlifting for a long time, say 3 months, 6 months, a year, yes, you will almost certainly get stronger, and that will help your game on the mat. It's just a fact that strength is part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, no matter how good your technique is. The best people in the world, in addition to being very, very technical, are also very, very strong in sports-specific ways. Just take a look at the killer grips of some of the gi players, or the incredible leg and back strength of some of the wrestlers that are out there. They have great technique, but they also are very, very strong. So that's the superficial reason to weight train. Perhaps the more important reason to weight train is it'll eventually limit the number of injuries you get. Weight training for injury prevention is a hugely under-discussed aspect of weight training. It'll make your muscles stronger. It'll make your ligaments stronger. It'll make your tendons stronger. It'll even strengthen your bones to that kind of weight-bearing exercise. You were worried about brittle bones? Well, weight training, as long as there's no other underlying medical condition here, might be a good way to solve that. Now, that's still a long-term solution. So in the short term, you're probably better off to start playing like a smaller person, adopting a small man's or a small woman's jiu-jitsu for your game. I know you said you were the same size, just weaker, but ultimately, if you start playing like a smaller person, which is using more of a mobility-based game and not letting the other person crush you and pin you down, where you then have to use power to get out, you're just going to be way better off. So a mobility-based, smaller person's game may suit you until you get your strength up to par. Now, you're asking me what you're doing wrong, and I can't answer that because I don't train with you. I don't see what you're doing, and I can't feel what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. But you know who can tell you that? Your training partners. And hopefully you train at a school where you can go for a roll with somebody, and afterwards you can ask feedback. You can say, hey, what's a couple of things that I was doing right, and what's a couple of things that I was doing wrong? Or tell me one thing I could work on. Or even just, what did you think of that? What can I do to get better? I do this with my training partners and for my training partners all the time. And now some small-minded people might not want to tell you. They don't want to make you better because they want their ego to get stroked by continuing to have somebody that they can beat down. Now that's a separate problem. Hopefully the person that you're training with or the people you're training with are mature enough to know that if they make you better, then they're going to get better as well. Because if they make you better, they're going to have to step up to the challenge and raise their own game in response to your game going up. So I wouldn't ignore that resource of having a dialogue with your training partners. Maybe you're just using really bad leverage. Maybe you are actually as strong as your training partners, but you're just applying that strength in incorrect ways, which makes you feel not as strong. The only way to find that out is to ask your training partners and ask your instructor for guidance and ask if you're doing the technique correctly, and then maybe work on the strength thing separately over the long term, build that up. It'll help your jiu-jitsu and it'll help your body. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. So long as you're doing it properly and you don't hurt yourself doing the weight training, which is another common thing when people start out. They move to fancy Olympic lifts and they don't have the first clue of how to do Olympic lifts properly. And then guess what? Their wrists get hurt. Or they're doing squats and they don't know how to do squats properly. And guess what? They blow out their back. So if you can get some good instruction on some basic weight training exercises, the squat, the bench press, the pull-up, the deadlift, those sorts of things, I think it'll only help. Take care and good luck.
Hey, Stephan. My name's Jeff. My son is studying wrestling, and he was talking to his wrestling coach about studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His wrestling coach said don't study both at the same time because he had a guy who studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the off-season, and every time he went to wrestle, he immediately pulled guard and pinned himself. And because wrestlers, you can't ever put your shoulders to the mat. So I wanted to work on submissions with him and on our spare time, and I was wondering if you could give me a list of wrestling-appropriate submissions. Wrestling-appropriate submissions are defined thusly, according to me, no official source, submissions from the top position which you can apply without having to give up your back or without having to put your back to the mat. For example, an armbar for the mount would not be a good, is a submission from the top, but would not be a wrestling appropriate submission because you have to give up the top position and go to your back to pull it off. So this might be better off for a video and not for the podcast, but I've actually been wanting to send you an email and ask you this question for a while, and I figured now is a good time to get it out there. You can answer it whenever you want in whatever format you feel is appropriate. I would just like a list of submissions you can do from the top position that you don't have to go to your back in. High percentage submissions, high percentage submissions from the top position that you don't have to go to your back on. Give me a list or put them on a video or whatever's good for you. Once again, thank you very much. I love your stuff. You do great work. Bought a lot of your DVDs. They're great. And hope you have a great evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey, Jeff. First of all, I've got to say, I wouldn't take this concern too seriously. Now, obviously, if you pull guard in a wrestling match, you're going to lose. Fine, I don't disagree there. But on the other hand, you don't see MMA guys saying, oh, I better not go to wrestling class because they start in the referee's position sometimes, and I don't want to get in the habit of going to the referee's position in an MMA match. No, they understand that when you go to a wrestling class, you're going to take some things with you into the rest of your life, and you're going to leave some things there. When Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys go and train judo to get ready for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition, you don't see them saying, oh, I better not go to judo, because in judo, sometimes they just lie there. They don't even turtle. They just lie there flat and grip their lapels. And if I did that in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'd get rear-mounted. No, they avoid doing that in judo typically. They'll turn and play guard instead of turtling, which would be the standard judo answer to a lot of groundwork situations. So they're still going to play their supplementary sport, in their case judo, in your son's case possibly Brazilian jiu-jitsu, in a way that is going to emphasize the main way that they want to play their primary sport. And that's okay, because there's all kinds of different ways of playing it. And finally, it's a little bit strange to be asking for wrestling-appropriate submissions when any of the submissions I tell you about are probably going to get somebody disqualified if they break them out in a wrestling competition. So, in the same way that you shouldn't pull guard in a wrestling competition, you also shouldn't pull a Kimura arm lock that keeps you on top and hurt somebody's arm, because that'll get you kicked out of a wrestling competition. All that being said, I don't think that what you're asking for is that difficult, because there's a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that emphasizes in staying in the top position. I come from a Carlson Gracie background, and Carlson was always preaching about going to the top position, staying on top, putting pressure on your opponent, all of which is 100% compatible with the wrestling context, right? And you don't have to go always to your back to be a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy. You can be a top player in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu situation. Now, I'm assuming you're talking about no-gi submissions here. So I'll give you a couple of ideas, but really a lot of them will work, just so long as you avoid regular arm bars and triangles and locking on a guillotine and flop into your back. You still do lots of guillotines where you don't fall to your back. I would suggest that there's probably more attacks from side mount or from a headlock or kezugatame kind of position that'll keep you on top. Anytime you're in the mount and you're going for a submission, there is a chance you're going to get rolled onto your back, which would be bad in your context. Much harder in side mount. The guy might get out, but you're not going to get rolled. So from side mount, you can work on your bent arm locks, your Americana, your Kimura. You can work on your arm triangles, where you're taking the guy's arm and his head and you're driving his deltoid into his neck to choke him. The reverse arm triangle. From kezugatame, there's a whole series of headlock and arm lock attacks that you can do. In general, I'd stay away from triangles, or at least a traditional triangle where you're doing it straight on. A side triangle might work. I'd stay away from regular arm bars. There's lots of straight arm locks where you're not falling to your back, though. For example, there's a straight arm lock that in judo is called udegatame, and in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is often called a straight arm crush, where you stay on top and you cup the guy's wrist between your neck and your shoulder and you pull in on his elbow. That keeps you on top. Worst case scenario, the guy gets out, but he usually doesn't get to the top, and you don't usually end up on your back. But I guess the main thing I want to say is don't worry too much about it, as long as you and your son are working on whatever, even if you're working off of getting the guillotine and flopping to your guard. It's okay, as long as he understands that that's not what you do in wrestling. It's okay in one situation, it's not okay in another. It's all right to wear a baseball hat when you're walking around the street. It's not okay to do it when you're going to a formal dress dinner. Most people can understand appropriateness of actions in one sport or the other. And as long as you're pretty clear about it, as long as your son has a good head on his shoulders, I'm sure he'll be okay, and he'll be able to navigate between the two sports no problem. Lots of other people do.
Hey, Kesting, this is Mike Santos from North Carolina, son of Jay Moreno. My question is, do you feel like drilling techniques is more important than actually free rolling? And that's it. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, thanks for your call. Now, the quick answer to your question would be, I think that they're both important. If you take a look at all the high-level guys, they all drill and they all free roll. And the proportions of drilling and free rolling may change. Usually as they're getting closer to a competition, they're doing more free rolling. And when they're trying to work something new into their game, they might be doing more drilling. So you really should do both. I do both. Almost everybody does both. Now, the answer to your question gets a little bit more complex when you talk about advanced drilling as well as targeted sparring, because at this point, those two distinct categories really begin to overlap. For example, let's say that I'm sparring with somebody who's not nearly as good as me and is maybe even lighter than me. The only way I can get something out of that sparring session really is to work one technique. Say my goal is an armbar from the mount. So again and again and again, no matter where I start, I'm going to pass the guard, say, or get out of the pin, get to the top, get to the mount, and then try and get that one arm bar, maybe only on one side. Is that sparring? Is that drilling? I don't know. It's kind of a mixture of both. Or another example, I just recently did this with a friend of mine who was getting ready for a belt test. His game was really good all over, except in the one area of defending the open guard. He was having problems with his students blasting through his open guard, doing a certain kind of guard pass, basically controlling his pant leg and then running around using rapid lateral movement. So then for an hour, we did nothing but him being an open guard and me trying to simulate a certain kind of guard pass. So that was targeted sparring for me. I'm trying to get better at a certain kind of guard pass, and very targeted sparring or almost drilling for him. Now, it's not drilling in terms of first you do this, then you do that, then you do this other thing. But it is very targeted in the sense that we're improving mostly one aspect of his game and one aspect of my game. And that kind of sparring is pretty common as you go up in level. So that makes it more complicated, and I think that kind of sparring is pretty important. When you watch really high-level guys, they're often experimenting with one new thing that they're trying to add to their game, a new guard sweep or a new pin escape. So they might give people who are not nearly as good as them the pin and then get out the same way every time. Now, when they're rolling with somebody about their own level or higher, then it's free rolling. To quote an old movie, Buckaroo Banzai, at that point, wherever you go, there you are. There's no constraints as to what positions they end up in, what techniques they're using. It's just a dogfight. And that's also good for you. It's good to experience that kind of intensity, that kind of pressure, and that kind of responding to an out-of-control situation. So the short answer is you need to do both. The long answer is that drilling and sparring aren't really as separate as a lot of people have them. And as you get better, you're going to find that there's a lot of overlap between the two, and you'll often spend time in the gray zone, where you're not really drilling and you're not really sparring, but you're working on a specific aspect of your game. I hope this long answer to your short question gives you something of value and something that you can work with in your own training.
Hi, Stephan. This is Andrew. I have a question regarding escapes from different types of triangle chokes. I know when you're inside someone's guard and you pass one arm under or some other method, you get the front triangle in the guard. As you know, and many other readers know, that there are other types of triangles, the side triangle, the rear triangle, the reverse triangle. In particular, the rear triangle, or even the side triangle. First of all, the rear triangle, if you have someone's back and you underhook one of your legs, and you just leg that was underhooked up to his throat, pull his arm on the other side that didn't underhook up straight, and then triangle your legs underneath his armpit. That would be the rear triangle. How would you escape from that? It seems like a pretty interesting submission. I've gotten it several times with many different people. And that's about it. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Okay, so you're asking about rear triangle escapes and possibly even side triangle escapes. And for anybody who's listening, the first thing, if you're not familiar with these triangles, I suggest that you go to YouTube and look for 5 triangle chokes you must know. Just a short little video I put out about the 5 basic, most common types of triangles involving your legs. And the types of triangles that you're referring to aren't the main front-on triangle, which is the first one I show. It's the rear triangle, which is triangle 2, and the side triangle, which is triangle 3 that I show on that little video. So if people don't know what we're talking about, they should go and look at that video, and then they'll be in the know. So you asked about how to counter the rear triangle. Well, like all submissions, you can counter it before, during, and after. You can counter it before it's set up. So now say that you've got me in rear mount and you're trying to apply the rear triangle on me. Now, I can prevent it before I ever get there, right? I cannot let you force your leg over my arm, or I cannot put my arm under your leg while giving you my other arm. I either put both arms under or no arms under, and that would be a simple example of how to prevent it before. You can escape it during as well. That's while the person's locking it on. And with most triangles, whether it's the standard front-on triangle or the side triangle or the rear triangle or other variations of the triangle, there's usually a stage where the person just has his ankles crossed and is maneuvering towards getting it fully locked on. Or in the case of the side triangle, they might have their ankles locked and they don't have their leg underneath the back of the neck like a chopping block, right? Their leg is trapped somewhere under their back. And if you can exacerbate these things for your opponent, if you can prevent him from moving from having his ankles crossed to having his legs fully triangled, if you can prevent him from adjusting his leg so it's right across your throat or right behind your neck, depending which triangle you're talking about, then that's escaping during. Finally, if it's fully locked on, that's a pretty hard triangle to escape from because you don't have anything in front of you to see, very little to grab onto, and he's behind you, and basically he's got his strongest part of his body going against a pretty weak part of your body. That being said, I've sometimes managed to escape from the rear triangle that's fully applied by bringing my own legs into play. If you're flexible enough, and unless the guy's hidden his own foot behind your body, you can sometimes use your feet to unwrap, to uncross his triangle. Buy yourself some time. Don't let him grab your legs to pretzel you, and don't let him grab your other arms to stretch you out. Try and keep as much room in that neck area as you can, and then work to try and uncross his ankles and work him backwards. His legs are fully triangled. Try and adjust it so that it's only crossed at the ankles, and then adjust it so that his legs are completely uncrossed. Like I said, that's a pretty tough position to get out once it's fully applied, especially if he's managed to hook your leg and he's pulling you towards him. Then I hope you have a strong neck and a good lung capacity and just a lot of mental toughness, because maybe he'll get tired. But it's far, far better to have shut it down in the before or during phase of the lock than waiting for it to be fully applied and then trying to get out.
Hi, Stephan. This is Robert. I'd like to see an instruction on something that I've never seen before. That is how to prevent someone standing up in your guard. In the old days, you only had to worry about sweeps and submission when you're in someone's guard. Today, guys are standing up. How do you keep someone from standing up in your guard for grappling or MMA purposes? Thank you.
Okay, so just so that people know, Robert actually called back a second time to clarify that what he was asking was how to prevent people from standing up when you are in their guard. They have you in their guard, and all they're doing is to work for the stand-up and get back to their feet. So how do you keep them on the ground and begin to work your guard pass? Now, that's a pretty common question. Robert, you're onto something, saying that this is a recent development in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It used to be that you would just lie flat on your back and go for the choke, go for the armbar, go for the submission, go for the choke, go for the armbar, go for the sweep. And standing up has become a recent strategy that's become popularized. Now, I remember the first time my instructor, Marcus Suarez, showed this to me as a counter from the guard, like how to prevent a guard pass. And he basically said, well, when the guy does this, just stand back up. And it was one of those dough moments, like how could I not have thought of this? It was so strange. Now, to get to your question of what to do, basically, you've got to control their hips. If they can get their hips away from you and underneath you and you don't have weight on them, then they're going to stand up on you. That does limit to some extent the guard passes that you can use. If you're on the ground, then you need to keep them pretty much flat. If they can start sitting up, as they would if they were going to do a hip bump sweep or a guillotine choke, if they can do those attacks, even if they can't finish them, then they can probably escape their hips as well. They've got so much mobility in their hips. If their head is higher up than yours, if you're down on your knees and your head becomes lower than their head, they can often get up to their feet, or even worse, get up to their feet and catch you in a guillotine or a front headlock and put the hurt onto you. So that's one thing I like to play with, is the level of the head. If my head is higher than their head, it's a little bit harder for them to get to their feet. Also, you have to learn to really lock down their hips and pass low while keeping a lot of weight on them. Often this means forcing your way into half guard and then passing from half guard, because on half guard, you can put a lot of weight on their chest area and on their upper body, and then it's tough for them to stand up, right? Their upper body's glued to the ground. They're not going to be standing up. If you're passing with stand-up guard passes, it's a little bit harder. Of course, when you're standing, it's harder for them to catch you in arm bars and triangles, but it's also harder for you to put weight down on them. So if you do stand, you really have to play that distance game very, very carefully and drive in enough so that you're standing and they're flat on their back. If you're standing and they're sitting on their bum, then they're going to be able to get up. They're going to be able to run away. They're going to be able to come back to their feet and shoot for a single or a double leg on you. So if you stand, remember to have enough pressure. You're still going to have to pummel. You're not really pummeling for grips. You're kind of sumo pummeling, trying to push their upper body flat onto the ground and keep some weight. Keep a hand on their sternum, keep a hand on their chest area so that they can't easily sit their upper body up and they can't easily make the space to scoot away and kick you away and make the space that they need to stand up. So I hope that those are some ideas that help you. Good luck with that. It's becoming a very common strategy, and it's a good one. And it really takes us back to the importance of wrestling and the ability to do takedowns. If you are in somebody's guard and they come up to their feet, it shouldn't be the end of the world for you. Ideally, you should have a strategy, or failing all else, if you don't think that you're as good a wrestler as they are, pull your own guard and work for your own sweep or submission or takedown from there. But you have to anticipate it these days, and I think that there are answers, and having decent takedowns and good pummeling abilities is part of the answer. Good luck with that. Okay, well, thanks to everybody who, I was about to say wrote in, who called in and left their questions. I didn't get through all the questions. I think I'm going to make this a 2-part podcast, but at least I'll get this out, and then I'll work on part 2 probably in a couple of weeks. If you're signed up for any of my newsletters, I'll let you know when that podcast comes out. And until then, as always, take care and good luck with your training.
In addition to these podcasts, I also put out a regular newsletter on training. It's very, very jiu-jitsu centered. It's a ton of in-depth information about different aspects, different techniques, different tricks, different tactics, different training methods around jiu-jitsu, ground fighting, no-gi grappling, and even MMA a little bit. So if you go to grapplearts.com/newsletter, you can sign up for free. If you don't like what you get, there's an unsubscribe button at the bottom of every single email you're ever going to get. We'll part as friends, no harm done, you tried it out. But I get a lot of feedback from people saying that they found these emails super useful in their training, even a little bit inspirational. So go to grapplearts.com/newsletter and try it out. It's completely free. It always will be. There's no obligation. It's really easy to leave if you don't like what I give you, all right? Check it out. Take care. Good luck with your training.